Hello gamers, I'm Paul, and welcome to Tried and True, a story focusing on the revitalization of the Warmachine and Hordes community in the small state of Delaware. Our story couldn't have happened without the hard work and dedication of the active members who made this possible. Their time and effort has been instrumental in getting our meta to where it is now. So join myself and members of the Delaware Warmachine community as we reflect on the steps taken getting the meta to where it is now, and how you can use our experiences in leveraging your own success and expanding your own Warmachine community. Hello, everybody who is joining us for the first time. Welcome to the first ever episode of Tried and True. I'm your host, Paul.
And I am Dan.
So we are a couple of players on the East Coast in the Delaware, Pennsylvania area, and we wanted to take some time and actually share our experiences with rebuilding the Warmachine community over here in Delaware.
Yep. It's been a long journey, and Paul has actually done most of the work, so I take zero credit, and I'm just here to co-host.
It was mostly my show, but quite honestly, it's a community task. So you need to rely on other individuals. So right now, we're just going to be starting off with a little bit of introduction so you get to know who we are, what our backgrounds are with Warmachine and Hordes, give you a bit of expectations on what to expect from this short 5-episode series, and we're going to go into the history of Warmachine and Hordes within our local areas.
Right. So we've got Paul, who's doing all the heavy lifting and rebuilding this community. I'm just the guy that shows up and wins the steamroller, the first one he holds, but we'll get to that down the line.
Right. So I actually think, Dan, you should introduce yourself and your background because you've actually been playing this game longer than I have.
Sure. So I got my start playing wargaming right after college, around 2010, 2011. So that's back in the Mark II days. And I would describe myself as like a casual plus player. Like I'm pretty good at this game, but I don't focus all of my hobby time on Warmachine. I like to do other things as well. And that leads to not playing as many games. And there you go.
So my background is actually beginning, I think, in Mark III. It was like around 2017. The last thing I remember was that Ghost Fleet was the big bad boogeyman. So that might date myself on how long I've been playing the game.
So you started right after Themepocalypse then?
Yeah, right, exactly. But what's actually funny is that I did play 2 games in Mark I when I was a freshman in high school. I thought Legion of Everblight was the coolest thing, but I had no money. So I basically had Thagrosh, the Battle Box, and Swordsman, and that was it. Yeah, I got back into the game when I actually had more time and more money and resources with it. But I'm on the same page as Dan. I don't play super competitive. I like to be competent, and I feel confident at this point that I've played enough that I know enough of the game that I can enjoy it, whether it's a win or a lose. Yep.
So let's go over real quick why we're here and what we're doing. Firstly, this kind of started out as a fun side project. I had a bit of trepidation about getting into the podcast scene because you do one and I feel like it's a gateway drug. You're going to do 1 million episodes. So considering that, we felt it would be better to make this a very small project. We're going to have only a set number of episodes to it, and then it's going to be over and done with. This is just a deep dive on one topic, which is how Paul jump-started the community.
I really appreciate it. And there's a couple other things that are going on in here. I'm probably going to mention a couple of times. My wife and I are expecting in April. Yeah, thank you. Dan and I are trying to knock this out within the few weeks that I have before baby comes along. I was really excited about this, and this is why we want to do a short 5-episode series. We want to make sure that people are able to learn from my mistakes, our mistakes, and our experiences, so that way, if you decide to go forward and be able to make these leaps and trying to rebuild and revitalize your community, it is absolutely possible.
Right.
We're not here to complain about the state of the game or, reminisce about the Mark I or Mark II glory days. What this is a guide to make sure that your games are going to be going in your local area to be able to build your meta into a larger community than you ever would have expected, and hopefully just inspire other players to take on those leadership roles and make some huge impacts within their local communities.
Right. So this isn't like a current events podcast or personalities podcast. What we're really doing is this is our goal of telling the story and offering advice on how you can try to rejuvenate a meta that you live nearby to get some in-person games again, now that things are starting to open up in the United States after the pandemic. And hopefully the ideas and strategies that were used to at least reasonable success in this group are something that you can use in your area as well.
Dan and I have talked about potential topics for other episodes. We really like this 3 to 5 episode deep dive where you take a topic and have it be like relatively short episodes. I don't want to make any promises. We even made the joke about a Patreon. Do you want a Patreon?
I don't want a Patreon. I feel like that sets expectations, and I don't like people expecting things of me. It's so awkward.
Yeah, but if like we're at the Boca Brawl or something like that and you want to go buy us a beer, like we'll be happy to go and talk with you and chat it up and stuff. So
yeah.
And by all means, we're open to constructive feedback. Any other suggestions on things that you've even done within your own community, we would love for you to be able to share that, because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to build.
Absolutely. And we're not saying that there's never going to be another podcast after this. We're saying that it's going to have to be something very specific, because I'm not sure either of us, especially after you have your newborn, either of us are really into the whole weekly podcast that never ends sort of thing. So this is just a project, and then we're done. We'll take the next project if there is one.
Yeah. So we're going to go into the history of the Delaware meta as well as the Philly meta where Dan is out of. The whole purpose of this, and this is where we're getting into the actual meat of Tried and True, where we're going to be talking about where the game started, how it kind of persisted throughout the years, and then kind of like how it started to trail off. And what I'm hoping is that this is going to sound familiar to maybe your own metas or your own local communities. Your story is similar to ours. You're able to bounce back. You're able to recover.
Right.
Warmachine and Hordes, I believe, came out like around 2003. Hordes was 2004, if I'm not mistaken. And where you'd normally get your models was at local game stores, right? So typically you'd have groups going to these game stores. They'd be like, hey, you want to go play robot chess? And then they get into it and it's a fun time. However, lots of stores ended up not being super successful. In 2005, we had the Rogues Den. They closed down. Across the street, we had Between Books that closed in 2013. The store is still around, but it's no longer the size that it used to be. They used to do board games and miniatures and books, and now it's just pretty much solely a small bookstore. In 2015, down in Dover, there was Superior Comics. Superior Comics had about like 20 players, then went down to like 10 players, and then it closed down with Board Game opening about a year later in 2016, but the community never really revitalized after Superior shut down. We had Days of Nights. You may have heard of the store if you go to the University of Delaware or been in the University of Delaware area. There was a Warmachine Hordes community. However, I think there was like a falling out. But the guy ended up creating his own gaming club, which got us to the Ice House. Now, I'm pretty certain that if you're on the East Coast, you've heard of the Ice House. You may have been there for a Warhammer 40K, Warhammer Fantasy, Mord Hunt, whatever. In 2018, the owner ended up leaving. So the space had to be sold, or he wasn't able to rent it anymore. The Ice House Gaming Club had to find a new home. We got to Midnight Oil Brewing Company, which was awesome. We got to go and drink beer and play Warmachine in the back. However, as the brewery became a lot more successful, they ended up expanding, which meant less play space for us. Over time, less and less people ended up going. And then we got to 2020, which we'll get to in a little bit, but that's going to get into Dan's now and his background.
I think we actually met at that Ice House tournament.
The Midnight Oil, that's when I played Alara, and you just did all the Winter Guard soldiers, just knocked my stuff down. I'm like, this is not fun.
I was playing Stalingrad because I'm a degenerate like that.
And it was like my first steamroller ever. I didn't know what to expect. I'm like, oh, this is going to be fun.
Well, it's like Ersk says, complete subjugation of the enemy at any cost. All right. So for my part, I play out of the southeastern Pennsylvania area, right around Philadelphia. And our meta was a little weird because I was moving all over the place when I first started playing. As I settled down into this area, things progressed and, stores opened, stores closed, or I would go to a different one. So generally speaking, from around 2010 to 2012, I would usually go to either All Things Fun, which was in, I think, Berlin, New Jersey, or I would schlep my stuff all the way up to the Showcase Comics that's in Bryn Mawr. But I moved, and that was no longer convenient. 2012 through 2014, they Showcase Comics moved there or opened a new store. No, they had the store in the Granite Run Mall, but we decided to change gaming nights, so we would go to that store. 2014, Showcase Comics, around then, they opened a store in a strip mall that is actually only like a half a mile from where my house is now. I certainly didn't choose to buy this house because there was a comic book shop right down the road, but things work out.
Perks.
So I would go to like small tournaments at Showcase Comics, but anytime there was a real tournament to get going, you would want to go to Red Caps in Philadelphia for medium to large events, and then also the Portal Comics and Games up in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania for medium to large events. And all of these things were kind of just stores that I would never really frequent, but I would be like, oh, there's a tournament, I can go this month, let me just run out there. It's like an hour drive, whatever. Around 2015, I think, there was like the last TempleCon. And I feel like that's really when things started to go downhill, or really just the game kind of changed at that point. Not only because Mark III was coming out, but I don't know, the game just felt different after there wasn't a TempleCon anymore. Between 2017 and 2020, my schedule changed, my work changed. It was very difficult for me to get to comic book stores now. It was, stores were closing down or moving. Other players in those stores, like the Showcase Comics near my house, is still going strong, but a lot of the players that frequented that store to play Warmachine switched to a different game. We had Guild Ball, there was this Wild West game, there was whatever it was. The opponents weren't there anymore, so I would show up for a Warmachine game and there wouldn't be one. That's real frustrating. So we get along into the later years, and suddenly I found myself basically just going from tournament to tournament, and I would be really, really hard for me to get in games on the side. So it wasn't great. And then finally 2020 hits, or right before 2020, when he's talking about that Ice House tournament, things were starting to get weird for me. I was at the steamroller in the back of a brewery. I was drinking pints of beer while trying to move 67 Winter Guard models around the table. I don't even know how I was standing after that tournament.
What I wanted to do real fast, if you don't mind, is that I wanted to go back to what you talked about with the showcase and less people going. Mm-hmm. And this is when I was telling you off the side about the self-fulfilling prophecy. And when I start to describe it to our listeners, you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Where you go to a store, right, and you have, let's say, 10 players. Something happens where one of those players gets into something else, or a life event happens that they can't come to the game. Now only maybe 9 or 8 players are coming. Mm-hmm. Well, then the others say, well, I'm not going to go because not as many people are showing up. Or right. I showed up that one time and there was only one of the person.
It's like a ripple
there.
Effect.
And it is. The thing is, like, it's cyclical, where you don't go because less people are showing up, and then less people are showing up because no one is going, to the point that that's how I think these communities and these metas end up pittering out over time.
Feedback loop, I think, is what they call that.
Yeah, that's what happened with the Midnight Oil Warmachine group, is that I think we had 10 strong, and it got to the point that I think only 2 or 3 people consistently played. Mm-hmm. And when I say consistent, I'm saying maybe like 1 game a month. Mm-hmm. They still have a good showing of Warhammer 40K there, but at least for that Warmachine group, it pittered out.
So what we were dealing with basically between the two metas is that we were kind of in leftovers mode. It was just, we had a couple of holdout players scattered around, but the communities were kind of failing. And then the pandemic hit us in 2020, like in force. And so what did that really do to the Delaware meta?
For us, I mean, I already told you about what happened with the Ice House, right? A lot of us didn't end up playing. We did pick up War Table, so I'm pretty sure a lot of our listeners have probably played a game on War Table. If not, it was a great alternative. It was neat to be able to play people all across the country, even playing people internationally. I met some really awesome Australians out there. It was really, really cool. And then I also got to go play in-person game with my sister and brother-in-law. They live a couple miles away, so I would just pack up my stuff.
Yeah, it's really lucky for you that you have family members that play the game. So at the very least, you know that you've got basically a captive audience for opponents. I mean, yeah, it might be a limited experience and the games might get stale, but you at least can put miniatures on the table regularly. You can always fall back on that. I didn't really have that. For me, during the pandemic, when it was going in full force, I kind of used that as a time to step away from the game. Right before COVID hit, I had just finished building out, Warriors of the Old Faith list in Khador. I'm sitting here thinking to myself, I just spent like $600 on all this stuff for a faction I don't even use, and Archons, and everything. I feel like I'm just spending money to win the next tournament. And I would get first or second place reasonably regularly. I would get some of that money back, but it didn't feel good just buying the next big thing because that was the most competitive option every single time. And I was kind of getting sour. And I feel like, in a way, the pandemic for me was a blessing in disguise. I took some time off. I didn't use War Table. I actually started playing Marvel Crisis Protocol and doing that on my computer against opponents from all over the world, similar to how you might do on War Table. But I felt that by the time Paul reached out to me and said, hey, I want to do a War Table game. I want to get back, this stuff going again. And that's when he kicked off this effort. I really feel like after not playing for so long, I was able to come back fresh with, a new set of eyes to look at the game, and I was able to enjoy it that much more all over again. So I have Paul to thank for dragging me back in.
And you remember, right? And then it came into Poker Brawl, and it's just like, Dan, we gotta go be on a team. We gotta be on a team together. We gotta get practicing.
I gotta tell you, man, the Poker Brawl is like my favorite event. That team event it just fucking slaps. That is the event that keeps me rolling year to year. A lot of people say it's Captain Con or Lock and Load, but for me, it's the Poker Brawl. So, Seth, if you're out there listening, thank you.
This is getting us into the summer of 2021 when things were starting to open up. Really, this is actually going to be like getting towards the tail end of this first episode, right? The next episode, we're going to be talking about how we actually kickstarted the meta and the community at the game store that we now play at consistently. And when you're talking about taking some time off and getting some fresh eyes, the game's actually in such a great spot, right? Because the dynamic update, and we keep on calling it like the Renaissance period for Warmachine. But in all reality, like we're having people who kind of got soured over Archon Machine,
right,
really coming back and actually enjoying the game. And even our high competitive players, right, the ones who did the steamrollers over the time, they're coming back and like, I just kind of like playing this game and throwing models on the table and just hanging out with people,
right?
And it's a different expectation, a different feeling at that point. Let's just kind of recap, right, like the whole theme of this first little segment that we did. For a community to be successful, it requires people to make it happen. It may be really hard to get more people into it, right? If you're playing consistently in like a basement, it might be hard to get the exposure that you need in order to want to expand your group.
And you need to be in the public for this effort to be successful. If you're going to really try to engage with some of the suggestions that we'll make in following episodes, if you're really going to try to get your meta back up off the ground, you need the exposure. You need to advertise on Facebook, on Discord. You need to be out there in the public. And if you're not doing that, you're not going to get the attention that you need to drag old players back into the hobby and to advertise and make it a compelling option or a compelling way that new players can entertain themselves now that, the game is back up and running in full force.
And the thing is that just because it's your gaming community broke down and people stopped playing, that doesn't mean that it's over. As long as you have a couple players that are willing to put in the time and the effort, you're going to find yourself to be successful. It's a lot of work. No one's going to do it for you. But when you put in that time and you see like the months of work and what the payoff is at the end, and that it's consistently growing even more every single week, I'm telling you, man, like it's like the self-fulfilling prophecy, but in the opposite direction.
It's like, what did they say in Wayne's World? If you build it, they will come.
All right. Well, anyway, hey, gang, what's going to happen is that the next episode, we're going to talk about how we kickstarted the meta. So thank you for tuning into this episode and, enjoy the next one. And we look forward to having you back.
Thanks. See you.
That concludes this episode of Tried and True. We hope you enjoyed your time listening to the podcast, and we look forward to having you on the next one. Until next time, gamers.